So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at this webinar, which is the fifth webinar of EUA's webinar series. I am Francesca Maltauro, speaking from Brussels, from EUA premises. And this afternoon, we will talk about academic recognition. As you know, recognition is a very wide topic, so we decided to focus on the latest developments in academic recognition. And we will do that with our two guest speakers, Jenneke and Lokhoff from EP-NUFFIC, who will give us an overview of the current initiatives to streamline recognition procedures, and Howard Davies, EUA's senior advisor, who will present the preliminary results of the FAIR project, a project where EUA is involved. Before starting the presentations, I would like to give you some technical information. First of all, the webinar is being recorded. And secondly, we would very much like you to interact with us. You can do that through the chat box that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, but I see that everybody has already started using the chat box very well. Please continue to do so and use it to make your comments. And if you have any questions as well, you can use the chat box. But also you will be asked during the webinar to respond to our polls. We will launch some polls. You will see them in the box at the bottom of the screen. Now there is already one poll that has been launched because we would like, we are going to launch the poll because we would like to know what is your role in the recognition procedure at your own institution. So we will now launch the poll. And other polls will be launched during the webinar. Please interact, respond to the poll, and then we will discuss the results. I will now start with a brief presentation on the focus of the webinar. Just a second. So, the focus of the webinar is recognitions, and recognition is academic recognition, as I said before. Recognition, as we know it nowadays, is one of the pillars of the European higher education area, and it is the result of a political process at international level. But it is also a national matter and an administrative practice that is part of the daily work of higher education institutions and organizations. So there are these two levels, the international level and the national level. And today's webinar will look at the relationship between these two levels. So between the political and legal framework and the practice at institutional level. At policy level, recognition has gained momentum in the Bologna process in recent years, but these are in fact just the latest developments, because the first steps towards a more transparent and fair recognition procedures date back to 1997, when the Lisbon Recognition Convention was ratified. The convention was designed to streamline the legal framework that was already existing at that time, and it is the only binding text of the European higher education area. If we want to look at the essential principles of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, we can identify the ones that you can see in this slide. So, first of all, the assessment of applications should be done in a fair manner and within a reasonable time. The Convention encourages the comparison of learning outcomes rather than other quantitative criteria, for instance, the number of ECTS, the number of years of the program. in fact, the Convention encourages the use of qualitative criteria rather than quantitative criteria. And the Convention also states that recognition should be granted unless a substantial difference can be demonstrated, and very important, the responsibility to demonstrate that there is a substantial difference, and what is this substantial difference is placed by the Convention on the decision-making institution or decision-making authority. Finally, the Convention introduces the right for applicants to appeal against the recognition decision. And if we see it the other way around, it introduces the duty for the decision-making authority to offer the applicant the possibility to appeal. So in essence, the objective of the Lisbon Recognition Convention is to ensure that there is fairness and transparency in all steps of the recognition procedure. In the last 2 decades, there has been a considerable number of initiatives and projects that have been developed to achieve the objectives of the Lisbon recognition. And here I have listed the most important ones at European and national level. We can see that, for instance, we have now the ENIC and NARIC centers who work together to contribute to facilitate the academic and professional recognition. Then we have the so-called Bologna tools, ECTS, Diploma Supplement, National Qualification Framework, and European Qualification Framework. They all contribute to a greater transparency of curricula and qualification. And more recently, with the creation of the European Area of Recognition, we also have a manual, the EUA Manual, that provide credential evaluators and admission officers with a step-by-step guidance throughout the whole recognition process. Since last year, the recognition has found its place in the European Standards and Guidelines for Quality Assurance, more precisely in the Standard 1.4, which says that institutional recognition practices should be in line with the Lisbon Recognition Convention, and that there should be coherence of recognition practices, and this coherence should be ensured across the country. So, talking about coherence, this will be one of the topic of today's webinar. Is there coherence of recognition practices? In the next slide, we will have a visual representation of coherence in the European higher education area. We can see that these are the results of a survey by the Bologna follow-up group. According to this survey, there are 11 countries where all 5 principles of the Lisbon Recognition Convention are embedded in national legislation. But in the majority of countries, so the number of principles that are embedded in national legislation is 4. And finally, there are 11 countries where only 1 or 2 principles are embedded in legislation. And the principle that is missing in the majority of the country is the responsibility of the decision-making authority to demonstrate the substantial difference. You remember it was in my previous slide. What this table tells us is that there is considerable variation across the European higher education area, and that it also tells us that ratification of the Lisbon Recognition Convention by a country does not guarantee proper implementation. What the survey also showed is that in some countries where the Lisbon Recognition principles are not embedded in national legislation, they are in fact applied in practice. So this is, in fact, a positive result of the survey. The fact that even if the principle is not officially in national legislation, it is applied by the decision-making authority in practice. And with this positive note, I will end my presentation. We can broadcast the result of the first poll to see that we have 50% of our, no, it's a bit less now, it has gone down. Well, we have quite a few participants that have a role in the defining the policies and institutional procedures. 52, the reason why the percentage changes is that because participants are still answering the poll. So all three categories of participants are represented, I would say. Credential evaluation, so is at 54% at the moment. Let's see, we will check the results once all participants have responded to the poll. So I would now like to give the floor to Howard for his presentation. Let's see if Howard enables his mic and camera. Yes, hello. Hi, Howard.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Good afternoon,
I will
everybody.
give the floor to you now.
Thank you for joining us.
It's
very nice of you to be with us. I'm Howard Davies, and I also am in the EUA with Francesca. And my first purpose is to follow on from what she has said. She has mentioned the Lisbon Recognition Convention, and I want to add three basic principles that she hasn't yet mentioned. They're on my first slide, which you now have in front of you. You remember that the convention uses the term fair. Assessment must be fair, and it therefore is important that we all understand what fair means. Here then are three further principles. Those institutions who engage in recognition, or any agency that engages in recognition, is obliged to consider the purpose for which the recognition is requested. People request recognition of their qualifications, normally either for purposes of entering the labour market or for the purpose of pursuing further study within a higher education institution. These purposes are clearly quite different. The criteria that may be used are different, and it therefore is important, if the recognition is going to be fair, that this purpose is taken into consideration. I think that is generally recognized. I think the second principle on this slide is also well known and familiar. It is this, that recognition does not give automatic access to a course of studies in a higher education institution. It gives the right to be considered for admission. The third principle on this slide, I think, is less well recognized, and it is this, that recognition depends on the comparability rather than on the equivalence of qualifications. Now, we know that many agencies use the terms of homologation, for example, or nostrification, another example, terms which invite recognizers to match the content of the qualification which is held by the applicant with the content of the qualification which would have been held by the applicant had the applicant studied in the country in which he or she is applying. This is very mechanistic. I think it is generally considered that this approach, the nostrification, the homologation approach, represents more of an obstacle to applicants rather than a facilitation. So the emphasis of the Lisbon Convention is on comparability. The qualification which is held must be comparable in terms of broadly or narrowly defined learning outcomes. It depends on the discipline, but must be comparable with the degree in the home country. Those are, I think, very important principles which must be borne in mind. I'm going to move to my second slide, which is there, and to tell you that we in EUA are engaged in a project which is called the FAIR project, so capital letters for the FAIR project. It's coordinated by NUFFIC in the Netherlands, and we have been working with 22 volunteer institutions from 6 different countries, and what we have found confirms what Francesca showed in the map in her presentation, that there is really a very wide range of recognition and admission practices. The first point I make here is the question of the relation between them. Recognition and admission, are they separate procedures, or are they so closely bound up with each other that it's difficult to tell them apart? We have found, talking to the representatives of the 6 countries, that strikingly, in some countries, recognition and admission are regarded as completely separate, undertaken by different bodies, have nothing in common with each other, and indeed should be separate. In other countries, we have found experts and recognition practitioners who have difficulty distinguishing between recognition and admission. So closely are they linked in the organizational process. It's a very striking difference. If they are separate, my second point, if recognition and admission are undertaken by different bodies, then the question arises of who does what. What is exactly the division of labor? Well, we found that there are a lot of players involved in this. There may be national government, regional government, educational institutions, the ENIC-NARIC agencies, and on occasion other higher education institutions may be responsible for recognition or admission practices in their peer higher education institutions. There are a number of possibilities. It may be, if there is a division of labor, that it is mandatory or that it is voluntary. Government may say, this body will do that, and another body will do something else. It may be that universities, higher education institutions, choose voluntarily to outsource part of their operation to other agencies. It may be that if there is a division of labor, it's within the higher education institution, or it may be that it crosses the boundaries and goes outside the higher education institution. Again, third possibility, the division of labor may be vertical or horizontal. It's more common, if it exists, that it should be vertical. Either governments do not devolve to higher education institutions the powers of recognition and admission. They retain them at a higher level. Sometimes, however, there may be a horizontal division of labor, as in the case that I mentioned earlier, when, for example, one university in a particular country undertakes all the recognition activities for all the other universities in that same country. It is an extremely complex picture. And what it means in practice is that if you are a foreign applicant and you have in mind the possibility of applying to universities, higher education institutions in different countries, then it is impossible for you to predict, looking at particular country A, B, C, it is impossible for you to predict precisely what the procedure is going to be in that country. So different are the practices across the European higher education area. And it's because it's so difficult for applicants to predict what the procedures might be that it is very important for the institutions to which they apply should explain in great detail and publicly precisely what their procedures are. I'm going now to pass to my third slide, which continues this discussion. We have found, as I say, that there is immense diversity of practice, but there are yet more factors which further widen the range of practice. One is the level of the qualification. It does not follow that in country A or in institution X, bachelor recognition and admission is treated in the same way as recognition and admission for master programs. There is no reason to suppose that the procedure will be the same. Procedures similarly differ according to whether the program is open or whether it is selective. Number three, diversity is introduced when, for example, institutions in a country which has a binary higher education system seek to recruit applicants who come from countries where there is no binary system, but where the system is unitary. This can lead to interesting possibilities. Fourthly, I think I mentioned already, institutions operate within a legal framework, but that legal framework may be regional. It may differ from other regions working in the same country, even though all of them operate under the same national legal framework. I hope you're beginning to see how complicated the map is and how great the diversity is. Number five is the status of the ENIC, NARIC agencies in each of the countries. Some have legally binding powers, some have an advisory function, some engage in no evaluation of qualifications whatever. A further complication, a complication of the map that we are trying to draw. Now, there may be, since we have looked at only 6 countries, that there are factors that we have missed. So I would like to ask you, who come from many more than the 6 countries that we have looked at, if indeed there are factors that we have missed, and if there are, would you please answer the poll, because it's going to be very, very useful to us to discover probably very visible factors that we simply have not encountered in the 6 countries that we've been dealing with. So I think the poll is open, and if you would think of factors that we have not mentioned here and that you think are important, please mention them in the answer box there. This is my final slide, and I have to say it is a set of conclusions from the FAIR project, but they are interim, they are provisional, they are owned by the team in EUA. They are the observations that we have made. There are certain positives. We found that the institutions that we have spoken to are indeed very welcoming of foreign students. We have found that the staff are highly qualified, that they work under pressure on many occasions, and although they may have peaks and troughs in the course of the academic year, I think the general characterization of the conditions in which they work should be described as working under pressure. I mention this because it clearly has an impact on the fairness of the recognition process. It can impact on the time that it takes to process an application, and it can therefore have an impact on the use that an applicant can positively make of a recognition decision. It can also lower the quality of the professional work that is being undertaken. So I think that we should note publicly that the staff that we have spoken to have been very, very committed, but that they manifestly work under pressure. We've seen websites that are increasingly informative, and by increasingly informative, I think I mean that even during the period that we have been observing them, we have seen some moving from monolingual to bilingual, from passive to interactive, from containing lower degree of information to containing more information, and so on. So those are the three positives. The fact that there are more negatives than positives should not be interpreted mechanistically, but we would like to stress the negatives because it's important that we bring them to your attention. Here they are. There is, we have found a lack of familiarity with the Lisbon Recognition Convention. We have found that there is a lack of clearly defined and clearly publicized appeals procedures. There is a lack of provision for refugee applicants or applicants with insufficient documentation. And finally, there is a lack of integration of the recognition and admission procedures within the quality assurance procedures of the higher education institutions. That, Francesca, is the end of my presentation, so I'm going to hand back to you. Is that okay? By turning off my camera. Okay. I think by origin, do you mean the country of origin of the application? Incidentally, I put the slide for which I was asking the question. I put that back on the screen, so participants can look at that again. Yes, it's clear that the origin of the application makes a difference, but it makes lots of differences, if you see what I mean. If the origin is a country from which many applicants are applying, then that creates the problem of volume. If it's a country in which there are known diploma mills and known methods of falsifying qualification certificates, then that presents another problem. If it is a country from which very few applicants apply to any of the European countries, that creates another problem because of lack of knowledge and so on. So I think your question has a simple answer, which is yes, but when you break that down, you have almost to look at a case-by-case analysis of applications. That's true. That's true. It looks. Well, I think what I see at the moment is open to two interpretations. Either there are no additional factors to the ones that I've listed on that slide that anybody regards as important.
So here I see that the difference, the other factors that are mentioned are centralized, decentralized. That means if the university has some central or decentralized unit that deal with recognition procedure. And yes.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's what I meant earlier when I talked about vertical division of labor. In many institutions, particularly in the old traditional universities, there will be delegation of this responsibility from the center to the faculties, and perhaps even then from the faculties to the schools or the departments. That's true. And of course, when that happens, it doesn't always follow, but it may well mean.
I have a question for you, since we are talking about the role of academics.
Than there would
because
be
in the last Bologna implementation report, it was stated that one of the possible reasons for the insufficient impact of the recognition policies on institutional practices is the fact that academics are not involved enough in the procedure. And what the report said is that academic considered recognition as a technical issue for which they were not responsible. So do you agree with this assumption, and how do you think academics could improve the recognition practices? Well, let us, please tell us what you think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in many instances they're correct. It certainly is a technical issue, which is why the activities of recognition and admissions are highly professionalized. And the staff that we have spoken to are sophisticated, they're informed, they're skillful at working under pressure, as I've said. They have enormous knowledge at their fingertips. They are professionals. In that sense, it is technical. What is also true is that I think in something like 1/4 of the countries of the European higher education area, recognition and admission decisions are not devolved to the institutions. The institutions do not have sufficient academic autonomy to be entrusted with those procedures. In those institutions, it is correct, I think, to say that recognition is a technical issue and nothing to do with academics. I also think that that should not be the case. And I think that with the increasing emphasis that you mentioned, Francesca, on learning outcomes, and also with the growth of recognition of prior learning, then it's important that academics become much more involved than they have been up to now. When matters like this are devolved to faculties and schools, then my expectation is that academics will be involved. So I think that the optimal position is where an institution has sufficient academic autonomy to make the necessary recognition and admission decisions, where they are made jointly by a highly professional group of experts in recognition, probably located at the center, but working in conjunction with academics who within their disciplines are sensitive to disciplinary issues, learning outcomes.
Thank you, Howard. I will give you a little break for the moment, and I would like to invite our next speaker to join the stream.
We have seen
Jenneke.
Many universities sharing that ambition and working in that direction.
Hello.
Hello, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now the floor is yours for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, also welcome from my side to all of you. I'm Jenneke Lokhoff. I'm working at the Dutch EUA EP-NUFFIC, and I'm a project manager of various recognition projects in the EUA networks. And I will present two tools that are specifically developed for persons practicing recognition in higher education institutions. The first is an European recognition manual, and the second is a European good practice and training platform. Before I present the manual and the platform, I will briefly speak about their background to give a better understanding how they aim to contribute to streamlining recognition practices in Europe. But before that, we will launch a poll which we will present the results later. And the question of the poll is, have you ever heard about the STREAM project? So, while you are completing the poll, I will go back to the background. which you see here. So here you see the bigger picture. All these blue blocks are projects that are undertaken since 2009 with the purpose of streamlining recognition practices. I will not speak about all of these projects, but will briefly mention the first one that can be considered the mother project. This is the European Area of Recognition Manual, or the EUA Manual. Now, what is important about this manual? It was developed by the EUA networks at the time, in 2009, to end differences in recognition practices in Europe. Because despite all the good work done, which was already mentioned by Francesca earlier, recognition practices in Europe still differed from country to country. And it's obviously not a favorable situation for students nor institutions if qualifications are recognized differently in different places. So the importance of the EUA manual is that it brings together all the good work done in a concise manual reflecting agreement how to practice recognition according to the principles of the Lisbon Convention. It gives hand and feet to the convention. It's not just another manual, because for the first time it provides a European standard, or a European standard is given on how to practice recognition. First, because the EUA networks developed the manual and support the recommendations, and second, because its use is endorsed by the Ministers of Education in the Bucharest Convention communique of 2012. So the EUA manual meant the beginning of an effort to streamline recognition practices from the EUA networks. And as you can see from the blue blocks below, yeah, it's just the start and not the end. And very short, the big circle you see presents the projects developed for the EUA networks. This includes a training for the centers in the use of the manual and a quality assurance mechanism for the networks. And if you're interested, you can read about this on the website of the EUA networks, EUA.net. I will not further go into these right now. And the small circle you see on the right includes the projects that were developed for the higher education institutions, about which I will speak now. These are EUA and STREAM. So the first project is EUA, EUA higher education institutions, because after the EUA manual, it seemed more than logical that a manual was developed for institutions, because most recognition decisions in Europe are made within institutions. So yeah, if you want to streamline recognition practices, the institutions are extremely important. Maybe you wonder, why did we not just distribute or disseminate the EUA manual? Well, although the EUA manual is very practical, it was still technical, and it was written for the reality of the EUA centers and not for institutions. So we wanted to develop a manual that was useful for institutions and would really be useful to be applied in an institutional setting. The EUA manual was developed between 2012 and 2014 by the EUA by a group of EUA together with representatives of institutions. These included the Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, Tuning, the European University Association, and the European Student Union. And we also asked feedback from institutions when we were developing the manual. So the manual is based on the EUA manual, but it's written in a less technical language and with many more practical examples. It includes information that specifically applies to recognition in an institutional setting, which I will show in a moment. And the EUA manual is based on the EUA manual, so it's also based on the convention, the good practice, etc. And it also provides a European standard, just like the EUA manual. So here you see the manual, but I think the table of contents is missing. That should have been in the orange box. Okay, so I will just mention it. The manual consists of 6 parts and 24 chapters in total. And those 6 parts, they reflect the recognition process. So it starts with the introduction to recognition, which is actually new compared to the EUA Manual, because, well, for the ENIC-NARIC network manual doesn't have an introduction to recognition. Another new element is the part 4, which is the institutional recognition practices. And this, for example, includes the difference between admission and recognition and how to take this difference into account when outlining the admissions policy. And it also includes a part on credit mobility, which is also more typical for institutions because the ENIC-NARIC centers usually deal with diploma recognition. So all chapters follow a similar structure. And what's a big difference with the EUA Manual is that for each recommendation, an example is included. When we were developing this manual, we had 2 consultations with higher educations, one at the beginning of the manual to have a needs analysis and one to consult the first version of the manual. And we received very positive feedback, and we also asked how to follow up on the manual. And as you can see right on the top in a red box, one of the suggestions was to develop an online training based on the manual. And this is actually what we did in a follow-up project. And maybe we can show now the results of the poll. Who has heard of Stream? Okay, so 61% has not yet heard of Stream. So, and 34.8% has. It's quite a lot, actually. So I will now continue with Stream. Stream is a training and good practice platform based on the EUA Manual, which went live last autumn and has now over 650 users. The training provided on the platform is free of charge, and the platform will be open at least till the 31st of March of this year, when the project officially ends. And it will probably remain open, as we just learned that we have been awarded a follow-up project called Impact. I will now show you how the platform looks to give an idea how it can be used. So the platform consists of 2 parts. A real cases platform and a training platform. So the real cases platform includes a platform or a discussion, a chat area where anyone can post questions and others can react on this. So for example, we had cases posted on verification or whether to recognize a qualification, and others could react on this. So this is to facilitate discussion and good practice among admissions officers and others practicing recognition. And the other part of the platform is a training in the principles of the convention. And yeah, based on the manual, as said, an important feature of the training, and you see here the 4 training modules. So this is the 4 modules in which the training is offered. And an important feature of the training is that you can take the training in your own time. So when it suits you, this was actually a very important feature, or this important issue that came out of the needs analysis among the users. So it's self-paced. And every module consists of submodules, and every submodule has learning outcomes to understand what you will learn, and it will also give an indication of the time you will spend approximately on completing the module. Every module has flowcharts summarizing the recommendation of the module. These flowcharts you will also find in the EUA Manual. And every module has key messages to even more summarize the content. There are examples to illustrate the content. There are exercises to practice. And we also have a quiz to test the knowledge. And to illustrate the quiz and at the same time conclude this presentation, I would like to throw in a quiz question. Oh. So the quiz question, you see it below. I will read it out for you. An applicant submits a qualification, including a diploma supplement, with a list of 10 learning outcomes. A competent recognition authority finds a comparable qualification in the national system with a list of 20 learning outcomes. The competent authority concludes that the foreign qualification is substantially lacking in learning outcomes compared to the national one and decides that full recognition cannot be granted. Is this in line with the EUA Manual? A. And now you can vote. A. Yes. The assessment of learning outcomes should take precedence in a recognition decision, and the differences between 10 and 20 is quite substantial. B. No, the number of learning outcomes is not indicative of the overall output of the qualification. C. No, the qualification can still be recognized if all 10 learning outcomes of the foreign qualification can be found in the list of 20 learning outcomes of the national qualification. So while we await these results, we may want to comment on
and it provides
poll
training on these issues.
Actually, I'm quite, yeah.
Yes. Jenneke, I have a question for you because NUFFIC, EP-NUFFIC has been very much involved in projects and initiatives to promote and streamline recognition procedures and so on. But according to the Bologna implementation report, one of the reasons behind the low impact of these initiatives and tools may be due to the insufficient dissemination and awareness raising. So what do you think about that? Because the impression I have is that, in fact, the number of initiatives that were targeted, for instance, to ENIC/NARICs, or the number of initiatives for institutions is considerable, and the initiatives are really useful and they tackle the issue. So what do you think about this assumption from the Bologna implementation report?
Yes, Francesca, I share your impression, but I think there are a couple of things going on here. I agree that dissemination activities are insufficient, but not because they're not enough dissemination activities, because as you point out, there are quite a few, but they might not all be effective and balanced throughout Europe. And one major problem we encountered in the projects is that admissions officers are not organized at European level, and sometimes even not on national level. So it's quite hard to reach them. This is actually something we hope to address in our new project, where we aim to develop a platform for admissions officers and connecting them better with the ENIC/NARIC networks. Yeah, but I would also like to highlight actually that there are examples of good practice, like the one that was organized, the Hogeschoolrector Conference has organized a series of recognition events as part of the Nexus project, and the participation was very high.
What do you think, Howard?
Interest and a goodwill to
Well, I agree with what Jenneke says. I think
is also something we saw back
another problem
in the survey.
I mentioned already comes with the intensity of the work in admissions offices in higher education institutions.
Dissemination activities.
There's enormous periodicity. There are troughs of low volume, and there are times of the year when people are absolutely overwhelmed with the applications coming in. And while I think that STREAM is very good when it presents itself as an initiative for individual staff in admissions offices and recognition agencies to participate, it's also very useful, I think, for the heads of those departments, for heads of international offices or vice rectors, or the people whose responsibility it is to manage the workforce. There's an opportunity in STREAM for them to manage the time of the experts who are working on recognition and admission, and to make sure that they have the time to engage in the staff development that STREAM offers. I think that's very important.
Yes, I think we can now close the poll, and Jenneke, be ready to comment on the results. We will now broadcast the results. So it looks like the majority chose answer now B. Sorry, Jenneke. Sorry, we are having...
Yes. Yes, B. Which is the correct answer. C, of
we are having
some correct in the sense
problems.
that it's no.
Sorry, Jenneke,
but
we are having some technical problems with your connection.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Are you back with us now?
Can you hear me?
Yes. The problem is that sometimes the connection interrupts. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I think you should start again.
Okay.
The right answer is B.
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Fine. So the majority of participants got the right answer.
So the correct answer is B.
We cannot hear you anymore. Mm-hmm.
So the correct answer is B. Yes. That's good that the majority had the answer correct.
Yeah. Sorry, Jenneke. I think what we can do is try to keep your microphone on, but we have some technical problems, and basically
C is not the correct
hear
answer,
half of what you say, and the other half of the sentence gets lost. Yeah. But by the way, it is important to see that the majority of participants got the right answer. And well, we also had some technical problems during the presentation, and especially when you were talking about the EUA Manual, which is certainly a very useful manual, and it provides visual representations of all the different steps of the evaluation process. It guides credential evaluators at institutions through all the different steps. I have a question now for you, because we know that the manual provides guidelines, but it does not suggest one organizational model over another one. And I would, because each institution is free to organize its own recognition procedure. But I would like to know, Howard, from you, if you have encountered a model that proved to be particularly fit for the purpose.
I think it's very difficult to specify a model, but we've seen that the variables are numerous. The contexts are so widely discrepant that it's very hard to say, okay, here is a particular model which is recommended for everybody. I think that certain principles apply. I think I've mentioned them already. Academic autonomy, institutional autonomy is very important. A highly professionalized group of recognizers and admitters, if I can call them that, are important. Working in conjunction with academics who have received sufficiently sensitive training to be able to work with them on a collaborative basis. I think that's one element. The other element is the quality assurance. I think it's important that these processes be incorporated into the routine, annual, or whatever the rhythm is of institutional quality assurance. We often use, when we talk to institutions, the example of the dropout rate. And we say, look, is it possible that if in a particular program or in a particular faculty or in a particular institution there is a high dropout rate, is it possible that this might have anything to do with recognition and admission procedures? And the answer is, well, it may or may not. This is precisely the sort of question that quality assurance could help to answer. So I think those are the elements. But in the end, it's for each institution, in full knowledge of its mission and its context, to work out the optimal arrangement of recognition and admission. We're talking about intelligent institutions. I think they're perfectly capable of doing that, and their job then is to make sure that it works and to inform the applicants exactly how it works. That's how I see it.
And I am sure that institutions are now considering including recognition procedures into their quality assurance, their internal quality assurance, because recognition has been mentioned in the European Standard and Guidelines for Quality Assurance, and they say that recognition should be part of quality assurance process in the institution. So certainly this will help, but we were wondering whether institutions are ready to do so, because so far the institutions we talked to seemed not to have recognition procedures included in the process, so far at least. I would also like to encourage our audience to ask questions, because the webinar will soon be over, and if you have questions that you would like to ask to our speakers, please do so and write your question in the chat box. I just wanted to wait a couple of minutes to see if there were questions coming up, but if not, I think that we can end our webinar here. I would like to thank our speakers. I apologize for the small technical problems we had during Jenneke's presentation. And I would also like to show you if we can show the box with all our reference material, because we had links to, we had some links to the documents that we have been referring to during the presentation, and you can find them at the bottom of the screen on the left side. There are some web links for you where you can download all the documents that we have been mentioning during the presentation. So Howard, thank you very much. Jenneke, thank you very much. I hope that this webinar was useful for our participants. And here is the next EUA webinar on the university's response to the refugee crisis. EUA has designed the map that you see on this slide. So if you want to know more on this latest initiative, please be with us on the 23rd of March at 2 p.m. for the next webinar. And thank you all. And I think we can close here.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.